Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all those members watching around the world live on Friday, 12th of November, and to all those of you who might tune into this afterwards. Welcome to day 5 of the 6th OWSD General Assembly and International Conference. And we've had a fantastic week. We've had wonderful panel sessions. Yesterday we had a very enthusiastic, interesting, passionate discussion on the applied sciences and their relationship to development. The day before that, we had another wonderful panel session on the basic sciences and the relationship to development. And on Tuesday, we had a wonderful panel discussion on OWSD members' responses to COVID-19. So members around the world have been up here and talking about their own experiences. We've also had two so far wonderful keynote speakers. We had Bina Agarwal yesterday talking about farming practices in India and around the world. And we also had Fabiola Giannotti from CERN talking about what it's like being the director of such a big science institution and how to get more women involved in physics. And we've had wonderful poster sessions too. So on Tuesday, we had our first poster session for the COVID-19 research that's being done. And on Monday and Tuesday next week, we'll have the poster sessions for the basic sciences and the applied sciences. So hope you're managing to watch all these wonderful sessions and go and look at the posters. The posters are always available in the lounge for you to look at. And then when we have the live sessions, you can actually go and talk to the people in front of their posters on a live video chat if you want to. And I repeat again that we've got this fantastic recipe book that members have contributed to, and we've got a photo book also in the lounge, and there's also a memorial booth to Lydia Makubu, OWSD's first president, who passed away this year. So it's been a really packed program, but also incredibly varied, and we've had such fantastic guests. And today is absolutely not an exception. Today is quite a different and wonderful occasion. We've called it a workshop, 2 workshops, but in actual fact, because of the numbers of participants, obviously it can't be so interactive. Just to give you some idea of how many people are watching as well, yesterday we had over 800 viewers online. We've had over 1,500 actual registrations for the conference, which is really wonderful. And our membership is growing every day as people are desperately trying to also log on as members so that they can write in the chat. So really, if you're going to be speaking or writing comments today, you have the world watching you. So today's session is called Increasing Your Visibility and Impact as a Scientist. And we have 2 basic ways that we're going to look at how to do this. The first is through podcasts. And what you're going to get is the most amazing kind of introduction to podcasting from an internationally celebrated podcaster from Kenya. That's Adelle Onyango, and she's going to come on very shortly. And also Joy Owango, who is the executive director of the Training Center in Communication, which is also based in Nairobi in Kenya. And you may have met Joy yesterday if you were listening to us yesterday. Joy moderated the wonderful session on the applied sciences and development. So that's the first session. Then we'll have a coffee break, and then we'll have another wonderful session talking about the OWSD Visions project with our consultant filmmaker, Nicole Leghissa, who's actually in the studio here with me today because we're both based in Trieste. So I can see Nicole over the computer here. And she's going to be talking to us about how she has managed to train online some filmmakers and to tell stories of wonderful women scientists all over the world. And we're hoping to encourage some of you here to do the same later. And then we'll finish off with a conversation with Adele and Joy and Nicole, and I'll join in as well, talking about the importance of storytelling for making an impact. So that's an overview of the session. And now we're going to start with the first part of our session, and I'm just going to introduce you to Joy before she goes on and introduces you to Adelle. Hi, Joy.
Hi. Thank you so much for bringing me in today's session as well.
Oh, we're so happy to have you, Joy. Joy is an experienced, award-winning founding director of the Training Centre in Communication, otherwise known as TCC Africa, and it's based in Nairobi in Kenya. And they work in partnership with the University of Nairobi to provide capacity support in improving African researchers' output and their visibility through training in scholarly and science communication. And I know what that means in actual practice because we've worked a lot with Joy, with our early career fellows, and you'll see this also in Joy's talk, that what she's really doing is thinking about, every time you think about where you might publish something or where you might speak, you think about how many people you are reaching, and you're quite strategic about making decisions. So Joy's going to really focus on something that I haven't heard anybody else doing quite the way that Joy does, and I think it's incredibly useful and practical. TCC is the first African-based training centre to teach effective communication skills to scientists. Again, that's also really, really important. And as I said, Joy's worked with us and we've had fantastic results, and we're really looking forward to what you have to tell us today, Joy. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take you through how storytelling can influence, can help in increasing your visibility and your impact as a research scientist. And to begin with, I am going to share my screen. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Just let me, there we go. Just a second, everyone. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen so that you can see on what we are going to talk about. All right. Okay, there we go. There. Fantastic. Okay. So what I'm going to take you through is how you can increase your visibility as a researcher, and how storytelling can also help in increasing your impact as a scientist. And this is extremely important because we tend to conveniently forget that beyond writing papers, the world needs to know about your work. And there are so many ways in which you can do that. And today, we're in a situation whereby funders are demanding a return on investment. You being the investment, and they want to see who is talking about your work. And the reality is you are able to measure this. So there are metrics that exist today that measure what the impact of your science communication output. So I'm going to take you through some of that so that you can have an idea of what this process is all about.
Hi, Joy.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you put the slides on full screen so that we can see them without the...
It's on full screen.
But you've got the menu bars around the edge. Just need to put it on the...
Is it?
On the full...
Is that on full screen? Can it be seen now?
You're not sharing it now, so I can't see it.
I'm sharing it again. But
you need to put it on presentation mode, not full screen.
Okay. In that case, then let me just talk without the presentation.
It's fine, Joy. You can have it. You can have it as it is with the. You can have the slides up. It's just, yeah, it's not as clean as it would be without the borderline.
Yes,
but don't worry,
that's
you can
okay.
have the slides.
Okay. So as I was saying, it is really important to have to understand the importance of increasing your research visibility, especially when it comes to the fact that today funders are measuring, are critical in understanding who is talking about your who is talking about your work. So what is the measurement of your science communication output? And this is instrumental to who we are as a center, because as a center, we train, support, and empower researchers on how they can improve their research visibility. And over the last 15 years, we have trained over 10,000 researchers from sub-Saharan Africa in over 40 countries, and we've worked in over 80 institutions. Now, there's a rise of metrics known as altmetrics. Altmetrics measure the impact of your science communication output. So what do I mean by this? So you've written your paper. So you turned that paper, you were interviewed, you were interviewed in the press, there was a video interview, you tweeted about it, you put it on Facebook, and that is calculated. People interacted with you, and that is calculated. You turned your scientific paper into a policy brief. Which organizations use that policy brief? That information is calculated. And the reality is that funders have access to these metrics to measure your performance as a researcher. Okay, so it goes beyond just citation, but it now looks at how you perform from a science communication perspective. And that's now where we are leading to right now on how you can use podcasting in communicating your work. Now, when we are talking about podcasting, it comes to something that we've been learning throughout as scientists, writing key messages. And when you translate key messaging to podcasting, it turns to sound bites, because key messages are sentences that you make in 10 to 15 seconds. If you have to present any message in 10 to 15 seconds, it is concise, it is active, and it is very clear. So when you're able to make that effectively, it means that you are able to create sound bites for use in podcasting. Now, when it comes to podcasting, people tend to panic a bit. Because they think it's a whole new technology in communication. Yes, it is, but visualize this. Podcasting is all about radio presentation. If you've been interviewed on radio, if you've listened to any kind of radio interview, it is the same process, but the only difference is that it is in the use in podcasting. Now, it is in the convenience of your home. Okay, so what does this mean for you as a researcher? It means that you can take advantage of creating the scene, setting your scenes in the comfort of the lab, in the comfort of the lab, in the comfort of even the field on where you can conduct this podcast. So podcasts at the end of the day are well conceived, and they're effective, they are portable, they're extremely convenient, and they're an intimate way to build ongoing relationships with your community. And that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to make sure that you are able to conveniently communicate with your community. And the beauty about podcasting, when you're looking at the benefits of podcasting, is that you are in control of that narrative, which is extremely important. If you're in control of the narrative, what this means is that you are able to tell your story. You can tell that story. You can influence change based on the kind of work you're doing. So one of the main benefits of looking at podcasting is that the information is personal. It is unique to you. You are in control of the narrative. And this is what we are going to be talking about, making the information personal. As women scientists, especially those of us who are recipients of, who are either OWSD fellows or OWSD members, we all go through more or less the same thing. We are parents, we are nurturers, and we are balancing all that with work, and also trying to see the various opportunities that are available to us as researchers. You make that story personal. You can use your experience in talking about how you're able to balance all that with your research career. So this is the beauty of podcasting. It's not someone else telling your story, but it is you telling the story. And also another thing you may be worried about is, how can you consume podcasting information? It is easy to consume. This is information that by the time now it is produced, you can listen to it on your phone. You can get information about how to produce podcasts online. You can use freeware, open access solutions to create podcasts. Okay, at the end of the day, you end up cutting costs. If you're looking at your project as research scientists, if you're looking at projects as research scientists and you're looking at ways in how you can increase the visibility of your research output, podcasting is one of the best ways in which you can use as a form of communication in making sure that your audience, your targeted audience, has access to the activities you're doing. It is also efficient. It is also, as I said, is a very efficient form of communication, and it's on a demand. It's also an on-demand technology. Since you're done creating the stories, you'll find that the stories start picking up based on the narrative you are creating. So there's a beauty about podcasting. First, as I said, it is unique to you. It's personal information that you're sharing with that you're able to share with your audience. It is, you humanize the process of what you're doing through storytelling, and you're sharing that information with your audience. But then at the same time, as a result of you sharing that information, it leads to becoming an on-demand technology. This is a technology that, as I said earlier on, you can get online. You can use your computer, you can use your cell phone, and you can use your cell phone to create your podcasts. All you need, and you don't sometimes need even a microphone, you just need a good computer with a good audio system, or a good phone with a good audio system. So what happens with podcasting is that you are able to deliver your social networking strategy, and it is extremely portable. So which leads to the next point. What are the types of podcasts that exist? And these are some of the things that we are going to be talking quite often these are some of the things that we're going to be talking quite a bit, even with Miss Adelle Onyango. So number one, interviews. As I said, remember you make this as personal as possible. So interviews. Then the other one is conversations. So it can be just conversations with fellow scientists on matters that are relevant to what you're going through. So as I said, you need to look inward. What are you going through as scientists, as women? Okay, so we create those narratives and we control and influence the change in the narratives we intend to create. Okay, recordings of entire seminars or lectures, historical recordings. You can also have found footage, music performances, improv, audio drama, storytelling, scary stories, scripted or non-scripted material, or a series which is meant to be followed up, to be listened to in a particular order. So with that said and done, our next speaker is going to talk more about podcasting. And what we are hoping, what we are envisioning is that next year we are going to work closely with you in the national chapters in training you on how you can use podcasting in telling stories. As I keep on saying, visualize it. Don't think of podcasting as this new animal when it comes to communication, but visualize podcasting as the next step in technology, in radio technology, because now it means that it's radio broadcasting in the comfort of your home. It's radio broadcasting in the comfort of the field you're working in, or even in your laboratory. You create the space, you create the comfort. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Miss Adelle Onyango, who is going to take us into an in-depth on podcasting. And this is really exciting. And Miss Adelle Onyango is an award-winning podcaster. And prior to that, she was a radio broadcaster. She is really passionate about the engendering process when it comes to storytelling. And that has been pretty much the theme of her podcast. And from now on, she's going to take us through the process of how podcasting can be used in storytelling. Over to you, Adelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joy. That was so insightful. And I really do appreciate you making me part of this and to speak to everybody who's watching this about the opportunities around storytelling, podcasting, and where that meets with science. So I'm going to move over to my presentation and just make sure my screen is still being shared. Give me a second. There we go. Yeah, so just making sure everybody can see. Let me just check with the back end. Okay. I think everybody can see my presentation. Sorry, I was just checking in the comments. So basically my background, as Joy has said, is in broadcast media. So I was on radio in Kenya for 10 years until 2019, when I decided to just up and quit my job and start my own new media platform, first production being my podcast, Legally Clueless. And so in 2 years, the podcast has grown to be quite this amazing animal, because there's over 130 audio episodes that are out. We have 1 season out of our video series, and we have done a tour across 4 counties in Kenya. We did that in August. And now we're getting into just production of the 2nd season of our video series. So it's really morphed into something that even at the beginning, I didn't think was the opportunity that podcasting had. So basically what I'm going to take you through today is what your podcast should be about. Obviously, that's why you're watching. You're having conversations in your head about that. We're also going to look at what you need to start. One of my favorite words is free. So I'm going to run you through some free audio editing softwares, because it's very important at the beginning to just control your costs so that you don't mess up your consistency. And then we're going to look at what platforms should your podcast be on, how to market your podcast, and of course, one thing that you've been hearing from the beginning of the session, which is storytelling. So I would love you to, in the comments section, if anybody watching already has a podcast, just like plug it into the comment section. It would be nice to discover your podcast if that's already a thing for you. Are you about to launch a podcast? You kind of have episode 1 recorded, but you're too scared to put it out yet. Put that in the comments. Tell us about that. And if you have an idea for a podcast that you want to start, you can share as well. I think whenever women come together in whatever industries, in whatever fields, it's very powerful, because we kind of have an openness where we can learn from each other and help each other. So if you have answers to those 3 questions, just put them in the comments and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So the first thing I like people to think about when it comes to podcasting is building sustainable content, because you don't want to start your podcast and from episode 1 to about 5, you have this momentum that you've built. And when you get to episode 7, you feel like you've run out of content and there's not much that you can talk about. So you need to, at the beginning, think about sustainable content. Research shows that about 2 years ago, there were thousands of podcasts being launched, but not many made it past episode 7. And as of this year, that number went down to not many making it past episode 5. And one of the contributions to that is that the content that a podcaster started with just wasn't sustainable. So how you can start figuring out whether your content is sustainable is to, first, you have to be genuinely interested in it, because you are going to be the host. You're going to be the driver of this thing. I would hate to think that you're going into a podcast in a field that you have zero interest in, because then you, at a point, will just get bored of it and you won't really be giving it your all, which then affects your sustainability. So that's the first thing you need to ask is this something that I'm only interested in now? It's like, this is a genuine interest I have of it. And then you have to think about who your target audience is. Traditional media does this very well in building profiles of who their target audience are. I remember my days in traditional radio, we would actually break down who our ideal audience is to the point of giving him or her a name. And so whenever we'd have a topic, the first question would be, let's say her name was Sophie, we would be like, would Sophie really be interested in this? Nah, I don't think so. Toss it out. So when you're thinking about who your target or desired target audience is, you need to break it down as deeply as possible, because then that helps you, even when you're building your sustainable content, to think, would that audience member still be interested in this? It's really good to think about this at the beginning. You don't want to be running around in episode 20 trying to figure out who your audience is. Another thing is like, is it solving a problem? I think that helps you understand if your podcast has if there's a gap that your podcast is filling, right? And maybe you're not just going to get lost in noise of multiple other podcasts that are doing the same thing that you're trying to do. So you need to kind of step back and look across like the podcasting landscape, if it's specifically on issues around STEM, and say, oh, there's a gap here and here, and that could actually help solve this particular problem. That helps you, first and foremost, there's a reason as to why people should listen to your podcast, but it also helps you stay rooted when you are coming up with your content. You always tie it back to the gap that you're feeling. I like to tell people to think about if you can produce your podcast consistently for 1 year. So work backwards when you're thinking about the content, right? And if you say, hey, I'm going to have my podcast out at a frequency of once every week or once every second week, so two episodes a month, look at 12 months and work backwards and say, okay, could I really be able to produce this for the next year at a frequency of twice a month, once a week, once a month? And the reason that's so important to do is because you don't want to break your consistency of your episodes, because that then breaks the routine of your audience. And if you start off and you say, I'm going to have a podcast out once every week, and then I'm listening to your podcast, and then I realize on week 3 it's not there, on week 4 it's there, on week 5 it's not there, I kind of start looking for options. And so then that really does affect your audience growth. Now, another reason why it's important to think a year ahead is to ask yourself, is this going to be something that's going to be relevant 1 year from now? Or is it something that's kind of going to die down? And can it grow and evolve? This is also very important, because you are not stagnant as the host and the producer of this podcast. You're also growing. So your podcast, yes, needs to be rooted around something, but it needs to be flexible enough to grow with you so that you don't feel constricted by your podcast. And as I talked about this before, which is, how will this content be unique to me? And so that goes back to, is it solving a problem? But even deeper than that, it's as Joy said, you have the space for it to be a personal thing. So you really have to do some introspection and figure out, what am I genuinely interested in? What's my purpose? What do I want to achieve in this space that I'm in? And that really will be something that is automatically unique to you. So what you need to start when we talk about a tech thing, and this shouldn't be overwhelming, because when I started my podcast, even though I had been in radio for 10 years, I didn't know about podcasts. I wasn't even listening to any podcasts, honestly. I was quitting my job to go into the nonprofit world. I thought I was done with audio and with media, until a friend of mine mentioned podcasts to me, and I thought that I wouldn't have the capital to start a podcast. So think about it. I was at a point when I was quitting my job, so I wouldn't have a paycheck every month, which then means that I'm not trying to dip into my savings for anything, right? So when I thought of podcasts and the equipment that would be needed, in my head, I thought about the equipment that we would use in the traditional radio station I was working on. Huge, bulky equipment that costs millions of shillings. And I was just like, I don't have that type of money. And I'm not trying to dip into my savings for anything. But I also thought, what could it hurt to read up about it? So one thing I did was just go onto a Google search and literally type, what do I need to start a podcast? And there was an article that came up on a website that teaches people to do things ranging from like gardening to DIY projects to podcasting. And in the article, they had a list of different microphones you could use. And in each description of the microphone, they had an Amazon link where you could go and buy this microphone. And I remember clicking on one and seeing that it was about 10,000 Kenya shillings. Roughly, I'm not sure about the exchange rate right now. That's what, $100, and or just slightly higher. In my head, I'd come from a world where microphones were like much more expensive than that. And so when I saw the price, I was like, oh, I think I can afford this and still like have my savings not too diluted. And that's when I did a deep dive into podcasting and realized that it's something that I could start. So in that search, I found USB microphones like the one that I'm using today. And this one is a Blue Yeti microphone. And basically what that means is that all you need is your laptop and your microphone, because it plugs into your microphone as a USB would, right? And these particular ones, I've not been sponsored by them or anything, but they're really good because they're made for two people in mind. They're made for podcasters and they're made for musicians who want to do a cappella style recordings. And so they have a setting that is specific for podcasters. So if you feel like, oh my God, I did not study audio engineering, I do not understand sound, microphones, this is a lot. This is a good microphone because it's literally a knob, and you kind of can begin your recording directly to your laptop. You don't need a sound card, which is a box which would, you'd connect your microphone to and then connect to your laptop. So podcasting equipment is not bulky at all, especially now that, the tech around it is really, really growing. There are different microphones as well. There are microphones that can connect directly to your phone. So how they connect is literally to your jack, like where you put in your headphones. You can connect them in there and immediately begin recording better audio than if you were just using your phone's microphone. Those ones also can be, when you attach an adapter to it, can be plugged onto your laptop and you can use them. And so there are different styles of those. They're lapel mics. So there's one with only one microphone head. There's some that have two microphone heads and are really long in case you need to do interviews. And those locally go for about 5,000 Kenya shillings, which is, $50. Again, exchange rates. I'm really not good with math, so I'm just rounding it off to 100. And you see already in that sense, it means that it's something that you could feasibly start thinking about. Hey, I could start a podcast pretty soon. You do need your laptop, and I'll get to the softwares that you will use for recording in a bit. I mentioned a sound card. So that's if you're using a microphone that is not a USB microphone. You will need a sound card to connect your microphone to, and then connect the sound card to your laptop. But I do tell people, just go the USB microphone route. It's less bulky, it's still affordable, and you get good audio as well. And still on microphones, do remember, the higher the quality the microphone you get, the more it picks up, which means the more work you'll need to do on soundproofing the room that you're recording in. Obviously, you need headphones because you're going to be editing and you want to hear exactly what your audience is going to be hearing. And then you need your studio. So my studio, in quotes, is our apartment's extra room. And so I changed it up into a recording space and an office because I work from home, which I was doing even before the pandemic. And you can be very smart about how to soundproof your room. So you can fill it up with different things. Carpets, that's great. Have heavy curtains. Sometimes what I do is just like draw all the curtains when I'm recording, and it could be midday, but it looks like it's midnight in that room. There are moments when the back end of podcasting is not glamorous. There are moments when I've had to record certain things for clients, and maybe that day my neighbors are very noisy, and I've done it in my pantry with a blanket over my head, and the audio still works out quite well, actually, and nobody knew the very unglamorous back end of that recording. And so again, it's just to let you know and to demystify that you need a lot to begin. You can begin with the things that you have and then build on them as you go and as your needs for the podcast increase. I'm going to get to the editing software in a bit, and I've touched on if you can use your phone. That is possible. However, why it would be easier to think about a USB microphone and a laptop. If you're thinking about editing this podcast for yourself, it's just easier to edit on a laptop. You can see a lot more and make sure that your audio is pretty clean. But I do have a microphone that can be, it's a phone microphone basically, and I use it. I have it as a backup in case I go to record someone and something happens to my main microphones, then I have a backup. But I do prefer the laptop, especially when it comes to editing. And even while recording, it's easier to monitor if something is happening with your audio. I told you my favorite word is free. And so what I use to date, 2 years, actually, I lie, we're turning 3 in March. What I have used from the beginning is a software called Audacity, and they are free, but you can give donations, which I've done because I feel like they've really built me and my podcast. So it's easy to use multi-track, the multi-track audio editor. So what that means is that you can have many layers of audio. Again, I hope that if you hear me say something and you think, oh, I can't understand that, don't shy away from it, because it's actually a very easy concept to understand. And there are also so many tutorials online. So they allow you to edit multi-tracks, like layers of audio. You can also record audio directly onto Audacity. So that's what I do. When I go to record, I'll have my Blue Yeti microphone connected to my laptop, have my Audacity program open, and record directly on there, which is great. You can, for my podcast, I have a community who listens, and we have a hotline where different people listening send in audio notes if they identify with something they've had on the podcast, or if they want to share their story on the podcast, they send their demos through there. And if I want to play anything or edit anything, any audio that's come in on the hotline, I can actually convert it and load it onto Audacity, which makes it, one-stop shop for me. And that's why I'm saying you can compound or combine or compile different sound files while you're recording. And that's something to think about when you're making your podcast, is how to build a community around it. How do I get to hear the voices of other people who are listening to the podcast while I'm listening as well? And WhatsApp audio notes are a really good way to do that. And you can think about including the voice of your audience members in your podcast as well. So I've shared Audacity. That's the one that I use. These are other ones that are available online. There's Audio Cutter, free audio editor, Ocean Audio, WavePad, GarageBand, Twisted Wave. There's Anchor, although I do have to say Anchor allows you to record from your phone directly onto the app. It's a podcast streaming app, but there are current conversations going on about ownership around Anchor. And when you want to move your podcast from that platform, it can become a bit tricky. So if you are more aligned to Anchor, I would say just read up about it a bit more to know exactly what you're getting into, in the event, 20 episodes down the line, you want to move. However, it's one of the best phone apps for podcasts, both for streaming and also for the podcasters to directly record onto that. I'm going to try and make sure that I share this deck with Joy so that you can get all of this list of everything that I'm talking about as well. So let's go to platforms, which is really great. I'm going to start with the one right at the bottom first because it's African, and then I'm going to circle back to SoundCloud. In terms of picking what platform your podcast should be on, I feel like you should not limit where your podcast should be. You want to make it as simple as possible for your audience to listen to your podcast. You do not want to get into the business of trying to migrate them, because that's not your work. Your work is to meet them where they're at with a good quality product that is your podcast. And then also, I'm going to get to it in the next slide. There's ways where you can syndicate your podcast. So you'll have one main platform, and then through that thing I'm about to tell you about, you will be able to upload your podcast on that one main platform, and it gets syndicated across multiple other podcast platforms, which means you don't have to upload. If your podcast is on 20 platforms, you don't have to upload on all 20 platforms. And it's a concept called really simple syndication. We're going to get to it in a bit. So I always tell people, make sure your podcast is on each and every platform. When I began my podcast, I started it off on SoundCloud. In other markets, SoundCloud is not a podcast heavy platform, even though they're trying really hard now to make it comfortable for podcasters. But in Kenya, and to date, it still gives me my most streams. And so there is something there. I think it's because it was designed for longer format audio. So you'd have DJ mixes on there. You would have different aspects around longer format audio on SoundCloud. So I think that's one of the reasons that that happens. So I started on SoundCloud, and it works really well for mainly my Kenyan audience. But then there's also Apple Podcasts, which is great, especially if you are Kenyan or on the continent, for a diaspora audience. That works fantastic as well. And in the back end, Apple Podcasts also has really good insights that let you know the percentage of time that somebody has listened to your podcast. And SoundCloud as well, sorry, just to go back to that, it also gives you good insights about who's listening, which country are they in, what platform were they listening on. And I think it's important to think about the platform you're putting your podcast on, the type of insights it gives you, because that's what makes podcasting different from traditional media. Because in real time, I know somebody in Nairobi, somebody in New York, somebody in India, somewhere, wherever they are in the world, I can know in real time that they've interacted with my podcast, or they've listened to the first 20 seconds or the last 20 minutes of my podcast. That's just it's valuable information that allows you to kind of develop more programs or products around your podcast. But also, if you want to get into advertising and make a business like I have around your podcast, this is what advertisers are looking for. It's the insights and the numbers to understand who's interacting with your podcast. So think about that when you're trying to figure out the platform to put your podcast on. So there's Google Podcasts as well. iHeartRadio. So with iHeartRadio, they really need consistency when it comes to podcasting. So you have to apply to get onboarded, and you can only apply once you have, I think it's over 30 episodes, if I'm not wrong, so that they can see that this is going to be a consistent podcast. Obviously, Spotify, Castbox is also really big. Stitcher is big, especially in Southern Africa. TuneIn is also big. There's Anchor. And here's AfriPods. I said I was going to start with them, and I forgot. So AfriPods are a new African podcast platform, and why I really think it's worth looking into, especially if you're on the continent. They're trying to get a lot of localized insights for us. So, for example, how do I find out in Kenya, in our different counties, who's listening and what time are they listening? They're really trying to break down the insights to a localized, to localize it, which helps podcasters on the continent just understand their podcast better. What we're finding is that there's a lot of the programs and platforms that are developed around podcasting are still really centered on Western countries. And so AfriPods is trying to break down and create something that makes sense for African podcasters. So that's why they're on my list. And so I did speak about RSS. And RSS, when I was starting my podcast and I was Googling every little thing, I was like, what is this? Because at the point, there was not a lot of conversation or resources around podcasting, which already shows you how dynamic the industry is, because that was in 2019 January, and now in 2021 there's an abundance of information. But anyway, there was not a lot of information, and I was uploading my podcast on SoundCloud and trying to get it on multiple other platforms. And whenever I'd go there, they'd be like, oh, put in your RSS feed. And I was like, what in the world is an RSS feed? What is this thing you're talking about? And so basically, RSS stands for really simple syndication. And so this feed, once you open it, it makes it easier for other platforms to pick up your podcast automatically and have it on their platforms. So if you decide your main platform is SoundCloud and you want to make sure your podcast is on other platforms, literally all you're going to add onto those other platforms is your RSS feed. Some don't even need you to create a profile on them. Once you have the RSS feed open, they pick up the podcast. But your main platform, like SoundCloud, will make sure it retains all the information in terms of streams, etc., that are connected to the RSS feed. And so I think, so in the SoundCloud, why I put that in there, like the directions to where the RSS feed is, because I really struggled to find it when I was starting my podcast. And you just go to the settings tab. If you decide SoundCloud is going to be your main base, settings, content, you'll find your RSS feed there. Whichever platform you're on, there will be an RSS feed. If you decide to make one particular platform your main base, there'll be an RSS feed. That is like the DNA of your podcast. So protect that at all costs, and always check if it's opened or closed, because that affects whether your podcast is going to be on other platforms or not. So in terms of distribution, yeah, podcasting is its own industry and it's so exciting. So I've talked about how if you have your RSS feed, other platforms will just pick it up. So that already is a form of distribution if you think about it. Anchor is one of the platforms that says, hey, if you are going to be on our platform, we will distribute your podcasts to Spotify, Apple, etc. Because some of them you can't create an actual profile, right? But what the one I use is an actual distributor. They're called Libsyn, and that is short for Liberated Syndication. They have been in the podcast game from 1995. So this is actually not a really new industry. It's been there for a while. And they are the distributor that I use to push my podcast to especially specific markets in the diaspora. So through Libsyn, you share your RSS feed on that platform. You pick what package you want, because this one is not free, unfortunately, but they're really good, especially if you're thinking about making sure your podcast reaches different continents, different specific markets. They're really good in that field. So for me, I use Libsyn as a distributor to ensure that I reach markets like India. So there's a huge listenership in India using one of their top streaming platforms called Ghana. And so Libsyn is in partnership with them to get you on there. Libsyn is how I got onto iHeartRadio. I got onto Amazon Music. And so they open up the way for you to distribute to specific platforms in specific markets. I always tell people, though, to think about, because I didn't start immediately with Libsyn. I built my podcast and then I realized my podcast is rooted around African stories. And there's a huge African diaspora audience that I wasn't tapping into. And when looking at the different platforms they were listening to podcasts on, I realized that I would need a distributor to ensure I get onto those platforms in those markets. And that's how I settled on Libsyn. But again, just to reiterate, if you have your RSS feed, that also is a form of distribution because you have it open, other platforms will pick it up. So if only you and your family know about your brilliant podcast, then only you and your family are going to listen to it. And I think this is something that when we think about, digital content, we don't approach it with the intentionality that, say, other more traditional businesses do when it comes to marketing and really getting your product out there. So you need to think about your podcast as a product, right? And sometimes if you don't think about how you're going to make sure people know about your podcast, you will get disheartened because you'll feel, I've been doing this for 6 months, I'm not getting streams. Does it mean I'm terrible? No, it probably could mean that you're just not intentional about making sure people know about your podcast and in the spaces where people who listen to podcasts are in. So I'll share what I do that has worked for me. And for each episode, my podcast is weekly, and I do production for my online episodes every Sunday because it's quite silent in my neighborhood then. So what I do is for each episode, I make 2 promo clips. So while I'm editing and producing it, I also cut about 2 1-minute clips of interesting parts of the episode, right? And then from those clips, I make audiograms. What is an audiogram? An audiogram is a short form video, but think about it like a video, but it's literally just audio with a static image, and you could have captions of what's been said in the audio. That generally is an audiogram, and I think you've interacted with some on different social media platforms. Audiograms work really well because research shows people watch a lot of videos on silent, so they could be watching it in class or at work, and they don't want people to know that they're not focusing on one thing or the other. And so when you have your audiogram that has the captions on, then it makes it very easy for somebody to follow along with what the podcast is about. Those clips I put on different social media platforms at different times with links back to my podcast, just so that every week people know what's happening in my episode, right? So I use audiograms, but for our video series, we use trailers. So there's a short videos for each episode. We have used animations in the past. So again, my podcast is rooted on storytelling, and we work with a production house here in Kenya called Ronin Productions. And we have done an animation before of one of the stories, and it works really well. But we're a young business, so it's a bit unsustainable to kind of do that often. But hopefully we'll get there one day, because that really worked super well when it came to animating the stories in our episodes. Quotes from the episode also work well. If you have a guest who says something that is thought-provoking or leads people to share their own insights, make a quote post about it. And there are different apps that you can use for that, be it Canva or whichever app that you want to use. And then that can be stuff that you share across social media platforms. Building a community means, so you'll open a page for your podcast, but you have to keep the community engaged. You're not just throwing the podcast episodes at them all the time. So be creative with the polls that you make on the spaces, with the questions you ask them, so that you can also hear back and get some feedback and insights to your audience. Now, for me, I think I try and make sure that every day there's some form of promotion of the podcast, just so that I don't get drowned out in the noise. So when you are producing your podcast, produce the episode, yes, but also think about how can you make shorter clips from the episode that you will use to promote and market your podcast. The last thing I talked about earlier on that really works well in building your audience and listenership is creating a community. And when we created the podcast hotline, that really worked so well. Last week, I checked the hotline and we had messages from Mali, from Zimbabwe, from Nigeria, Ghana, like just different countries on the continent. And we use WhatsApp, which means it's accessible to all. They can send in voice notes or just messages. And it builds a community, and it helps you also not only connect with your audience, but you start to understand them better. And remember that, when I say trying to understand your target audience, the more you build a community, the more you'll know if you're still on track, if you need to amend your audience profile a bit because you thought your podcast was targeting this type of audience, but now it's targeting these others. It's not a bad thing. You just need to keep updating your profile, and building a community is a very good way to do that. Yeah, money. As I said, I have gotten to the point where I've built a business around my podcast, and at least now I am an employee under my podcast. That wasn't the case for the first 2 years. I think it's only in the last couple of months we were able to do that. And what I did was think about how podcasts, how traditional radio would make money, because they don't make money off the audiences directly. They make money off the advertisers, but the advertisers need to know that there's people listening. And so I encourage people to listen to traditional radio. I know it sounds like I'm taking you away from where the world is going, but instead of listening the way we usually do, where you listen to your favorite song and when an ad break comes or the presenter starts selling something, you kind of switch to another station or back to your playlist, I encourage you to listen to the sponsored ads, right? Because then it makes you understand how audio content or audio formats make money. And once you do that, you will hear your traditional adverts. So be it a jingle, that's one way. You will hear your favorite presenter sell you a new phone. That's another way. You will hear, if they go into a traffic break, you'll hear traffic brought to you by Safaricom. That's an ad. And it will make you understand what are the value pockets in your podcast, right? So if you say your podcast is around featuring different women in STEM globally, right? Maybe you could say it's going to be an interview style podcast. But at the beginning, you're going to be talking about maybe new news around whatever STEM related topic. That could be a feature in itself that you could pitch to advertisers and say, whenever you have something new, this is a place you can kind of like market it out. You could also, before the interview with whichever woman in STEM is in that episode, there could be a bit of a jingle. They're called tags, right? And in that, you could say, this, I'm trying to think of a name, but I'm really bad with names, so I get very verbose. But whatever name you give that feature where you interview this person, there could be a tag, a bit of a jingle that plays before and after that interview, and an advertiser could be attached to that jingle. That's a value pocket. So it could be you selling an actual thing, you creating features. And the great thing about features, whichever ones you create, whether it's an interview feature or it's a feature when you spotlight news around STEM, whatever the feature is, the great thing is that it's not only a value pocket for an advertiser to attach a campaign or product to, it's also really good for the listener. It feels really good to know, okay, we started the podcast here. Now we're going into the interview segment, and it helps the listener kind of like flow and know where we are at in this episode. So it's not going to be as disruptive as advertising is on traditional radio, where you're listening to your favorite song and it's chopped, and then we go into a terrible advert and you're wondering, that was really harsh, like I'm not even receptive to this advert. This way it can be a bit softer on your audience member, and they might not even realize it's a real sell, which is great for great advertising, really. And then you also want to think about how can you still advertise without disrupting the creative DNA of your podcast, which we talked about earlier when we spoke about sustainable content. So creating features and being very clear about what your value pockets are allow you not to disrupt your creative DNA. I find it risky to ask audiences to pay through subscriptions in my core market, which is Kenya. It works in other markets. You would have to do a bit of research to understand what people are comfortable with and what they're not. But I think that's also one revenue addition. There is also additionally how, I'm going to say traditionally podcasts make money, even though it's not a traditional platform, is they have different points of your podcast could be charged differently. So if you have if you say to advertisers, if we put your advert at the beginning of the podcast, this is how much it is. If we put it in the middle, which is like your mid-row, it's going to be more because that's when the main feature of the episode is. If we put it at the end, this is how much it's going to be. So you have the pre, mid, and the end roll. And those normally have different costs attached to them based on the podcast. That's a more traditional way, but my hesitation to that is it just disrupts the listening. It really does disrupt the listening. But can you make money? Yes, you can. It is my main source of income now, and there's a huge opportunity. I don't think even I've fully tapped into it just yet. Because I skipped this point when it comes to the numbers. Obviously, the advertisers talk a numbers game. And the good thing is podcasting gives you great insights. So if you have 10,000 views, which in traditional media would be seen to be a very small number of audience members, here you're saying I have 10,000 people. I know exactly who they are, where they are, some qualitative information about them. That is more valuable to advertisers now than what traditional radio says, which is that we think we have 1 million listeners across our radio station. We hope they're all listening at the same time every minute of the day, which we know that's not the point. I mean, that's impossible. And they don't have real-time data. That's something that podcasts have, and you could capitalize on that. I'm about to end my very long, talking. I talk for a living, so I could speak forever. But my podcast is rooted on storytelling. And, when you think about storytelling, it's the capacity to get your audience to connect with either a topic or a person or a product on an emotional level. I liked what Joy said earlier, is to humanize something that's very hard. And when you talk about things around science, that tends to be a very hard topic for those of us who are not in the science field. However, there's many things happening around science that affect me on a day-to-day basis. How do you make that known to me? I think storytelling is a brilliant way to do that. So, it's all about creating an emotional connection between your audience and this concept that you're trying to base your podcast around. Now, I like to believe that we are all made up of several small and big stories across our lifetime. So when you're thinking about your podcast, it could be, why did you get into STEM? For me, I'm not even in the industry. I would be interested to know about that. It could be around the challenges that you've overcome and how you did that. It could be, and I took this from, when I'm working with different storytellers on my podcast, I give them some prompts to help them zero in on a specific story they want to share. And one of those prompts is, if your life was a movie, what scene would be the most action-packed or the most emotional, and that helps somebody zero in on a particular thing. And so that's why I put it here. It could be a moment in your career that felt like a movie scene for one reason or another. There's a story that you can develop around there. It could be an experience that you went through in your career that changed your worldview and your perspective about life. What was that experience? What you have done, if this is like, these pointers are the core of building stories around, you've humanized something that has not been humanized to any audience in a while. So that could be a way in which at the beginning you could think about, what are my several small and big stories that could be the foundation of my podcast? Now, again, I said your story will help your audience connect with you better, see a more humanized side of the world of science, the world of STEM. It's right now, those of us on the outside don't really feel like it's humanized or it's relatable. So how can we do that through storytelling? I think is how it will help your audience understand how different STEM-related subjects affect their day-to-day life. And I think one that's really important when you have women in STEM and really connected to the bigger issue around representation of women in various industries. I think when we build our own podcasts, it makes it very aware for other women, other girls that, hey, this is an option. This is a possibility in terms of a career path for me, because through hearing your stories and hearing your podcast, then we've built a bit of representation, which is, something that is needed across many different industries. Now, I need you to remember that, and this was so interesting for me, that stories are really powerful, right? They can elicit different hormones in us. They can make us laugh. That means they've elicited endorphins. They can make us empathize, etc. So when you're thinking about the stories you want your podcast to be anchored on, it is very important to think about what hormone you want your story to release in your audience member. And I came across this while working on this workshop, and I thought that was so interesting and could go even beyond storytelling. It could go even into speeches. What hormone do you want to leave your audience with, and work backwards from there? So it's also important to make your story personal. When you are recording a podcast, remember, a podcast is very intimate. I'm listening to it alone as I'm doing my cleaning, as I'm exercising, as I'm driving, as I'm walking. It's so intimate. And I want to know the person who is speaking to me to a point where I feel like we're connected in a way. And how you can do that is to start off your podcast by sharing your own story as well. Is that easy to do? No, because it's not easy to open up, but it's so important to make your podcast personal. Also remember, as I said, your audience can also be a narrator. They can be part of your podcast. Remember as well, if you want to not feature if you want to feature more than your story on your podcast, so you want to have different people come in and share their stories, think about how you can create a space, even physically, and small things you can do to make sure the space is safe enough for somebody to open up, right? And really be free and honest with you about whatever story that they're sharing. That is very important to think about. Be ethical about your storytelling. We live in a digital world where it's all about clickbait and clout. And so people will twist stories that they've recorded to try and get as much shock to their audience. I really don't think that's ethical, and I don't think that's a good long-term plan even. And so just be a bit ethical about it. Make the stories that are on your podcast, including your own, very raw, very genuine. And believe me, that's what people will identify with. So just don't give in to the temptation of over dramatizing. So remember, a good story is authentic. It makes an emotional or personal connection. It inspires. This is the power of storytelling. It inspires action. Or I'll listen to a story and I'll introspect about my own life and where I meet that story and what I need to change or not. So it does inspire a lot of introspection. A good story takes an audience on a journey, right? And at the end of that journey, it leaves the audience with something they never knew or something they never had before. And yeah, that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to try and go back. Let me stop screen sharing.
Adele, you're live, and well, that was really good. It was really good. I enjoyed every moment of it. We have questions from all over the world, from Myanmar to Nigeria to some in
Wow.
Eastern Africa. We have quite a number of questions. So there's one that has come up where I'm going to answer, and you can also answer as well. And this was in regards to the legal aspects in regards to podcasting. This is from Myanmar. And so I broke it up in two parts. Number one, I was looking at plagiarism in podcasting, and then there's the aspect of defamation. So, and there's also some questions coming even from Colombia right now. So from an aspect of plagiarism, in order to protect your work, now remember we are talking as scientists, you're sharing new knowledge. The first thing you do once you've created your podcast, as much as we are also putting it in all these distribution channels that Ms. Onyango has shared with us, you need to put it in an archive. You need to put it in a repository, which will be able to collate a digital object identifier. You're already using some of these platforms. So you're either using, if you're in Africa, you can use Africa Archive. You can put in your audio and videos and you get your digital object identifier. Nobody will be able to plagiarize it. They will have to cite your podcast, and then you can openly distribute it. Remember, think of it as a science communication output, just like any other research output that you have. So if you're in if you're looking beyond Africa, you can put it in Figshare. It is open access. Remember, these are open access solutions that are available to you. And there's also PubPub. PubPub is also collates audio and visuals. So you can audio, video information, and you can get digital object identifiers. As much as we're telling you, you need to produce podcasts, take a step back and say, how do I protect that podcast? Make sure it is citable. And what we are going to do actually after this session is that we are going to make this training session citable so that you can use it. It's a training material at the end of the day. From a legal perspective, Adele, how do you deal with the legal implications with podcasting? What should we look out for?
I think you need to look out for, especially in production, across different types of production, whether it's audio, video, is release forms, especially if you're working with people and their stories. You need to draft up a release form just, to have that backing that they have agreed to share their story on your platform, that they know that it's probably going to be marketed on a number of different platforms. And then also that could be something that you put into when people are signing up, maybe to volunteer to share their stories. That is something that you could put into the document that they're filling, is just to, again, reinforce that they understand what comes with sharing their story on your platform, on your podcast. Even in terms of your community, that's something that I've done with our hotline, is to let people know when you send in this, that you're doing this knowing that there is a possibility that this could be distributed on the podcast or be part of an episode. And in the event that you do not want that, you need to state this very clearly when you're sharing this. And it's one of the first messages you get once you message the podcast hotline number. So you do it at every single spot, every single point, so that you don't get into any issues. Another thing that many people don't think about, because right now the laws around it and the tracking around it are a bit lax, is even just the music you use on your podcasts. And I listen to some podcasts and I'm just like, are you serious? Like, this is pure copyright infringement, So you have to be aware of all of that, especially if you're not the one doing your own production. Just be hands-on so that you don't get yourself into a fix where you've used music beds or audio clips that are not meant to be reproduced. From a production point of view, those are things that you need to think about. Obviously the ones that we know about is like when you think about the name of your podcast, etc., etc. Obviously those laws are different from country to country. Some are more expensive, but it's worth thinking about if you're building a business, a long-term business, into how can you do a search, make sure that this name is available, because you're thinking 10 or 5 years in advance about what you want to do and the ownership you want to have around the podcast. Those are things I think you should definitely think about.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question from the University of Port Harcourt, and this is from Chioma Blaise Chikere. She is a lecturer at the Department of Microbiology at this university, and she's in a very unique area in Nigeria because that is where oil is mined, for lack of better words, in the Niger Delta, and it's also a very dirty region. And the kind of work she's doing is trying to involve the community in the whole process and engaging them in the process of the mining of the oil and the petroleum rather, and also making sure that they are part of the process because of the techie relationship that already exists with the petroleum companies. And her question is, can podcasting help in science communication to non-peers, for instance, in host communities in the Niger Delta? She's directly working with these host communities. Would it be an ideal choice to work of a media platform to work with?
I think first, when I was hearing you talk about her work, I was just so thinking about all of the stories and thinking, when can I take my podcast there? I feel like that's something I would want to understand better from a community perspective and the people in the community and their stories. So I think it can work. But what I would say is to really evaluate and think about the routine and the accessibility for that particular audience. So is it that you want to record the stories of that community to an audience outside the community? That's one. Is it two, that you want to take the topic and break it down for that community? And if that's the case, then you need to think about that community in terms of like, do they have accessibility to podcasting platforms? If not, do you change it and work with a local radio station per se, in terms of like distribution of that content? You'll also think about issues around language, timing. So it depends which audience she's looking at, but off the top, I feel like there is something there that's a powerful, there's an opportunity for storytelling to do something powerful for that community and for those of us outside to better understand what's happening there.
Yeah. I think so, because what she's doing, I'm familiar with her work. What she's doing, she's actively engaging the community in this entire process. That is something that had been conveniently ignored by the petroleum companies. So this is a good example of how you can be in control of the narrative of the kind of research you're doing, especially when you're engaging your communities or working with your communities. There's another question from Sharon, and she says she agrees with the point you had made on how to capture your audience. And she said she's struggling to convey scientific communication even on YouTube, and linking science to real life situations will always be difficult. And she wants to know, she understands and appreciates that is a very good point, but the question is, how do you make that much more engaging? Now, that's what would come in, Sharon. The first part is, remember, Sharon, you're talking to another person. So visualize you're communicating to somebody who is not in your research area, and you are enthusiastic about your work and you want them to understand it. That is the first thing that you need to think of. The fact that you have access to a podcast, it means that you're having a conversation. When I was beginning my presentation, I said there are different types of podcast interviews. There's one which is just a conversation, and you can just have a conversation with your audience, making them understand what your work is about, or the person you are talking to in that podcast. So in order to engage your audience is not talk at them, is talk to them. And that is a big difference. And this is why Adelle was saying that podcasts are very personal, because you find that you're talking to someone you cannot see, and you want them to empathize with you, sympathize with you, understand your passion, feel your passion. So you need to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Adelle?
No, I think you hit it when you did your presentation, and you do actually have to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. The only thing I would add is maybe step back and pre-think about the next 10 YouTube videos or episodes that you want. When you do that work beforehand, it helps when you go into production. You're not like thinking, oh my God, this is just so hard. So think about those real life situations that you can link science to, come up with about 10 or 20 and just dump them into an idea can. And then, some won't make sense, some will be brilliant, some you thought were one, but actually could be 3 episodes. If you do that beforehand, I think that's important. And it could be even just talking to your people in the same industry, just like different conversations could spark like, that is science in our day-to-day life. And think about how to make it short, snappy, very engaging, straight to the point, and for people who are not in the industry like me to quickly understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adelle. This has been a very exciting session. Adelle, I really thank you for having made time for this. I hope you got an idea of what we, with time, will be able to take the national chapters through in understanding how to create podcasts, and with time, hopefully produce their own podcasts. And remember, you are in control of that narrative. You are in charge of that narrative, and you'll be the one telling your story, whether it is the daily life you go through or whether it is about your research. And we look forward to interacting with you. Thank you so much, Adelle, and over to you, Tonya.
Well, what can I say? That was just amazing, really fantastic. Thank you so much, Adelle, and thank you, Joy. And I'm sure, well, we're sitting here in the studio saying that we're going to go home and start podcasting immediately with the blankets over our heads, whatever situations we find ourselves in. No, that was really wonderful. And also, I know that Adelle just does podcasting, but we all think, that her beautiful pink top and the yellow background and the green OWSD slides, the visuals also.
The visuals are amazing, aren't they?
The visuals are amazing, and they make you feel, very inspired, and you feel like, oh, it's really important. Even these what might seem like small things, they add to the professional feel. And also this kind of sense of glamour, which I think science is missing, right?
And science is fun. Science is glamorous when you look at the end result. So yes, we should visualize it.
Exactly. Let's bring some style to science. Maybe that could be our motto. Our motto for the conference. We brought style to science, or we brought glamour to science. But really, thank you so much, Adelle, and for all the time and energy and thought that you put into that presentation. And I'm sure you're going to get loads and loads of new listeners as a result, and lots of people also setting up their own podcasts. So now we've got time for a 10-minute break before we come back and have the wonderful Nicole Leghissa from Italy, who is our film consultant, and she's going to be explaining and showing how, despite COVID-19, when all of us were locked down in our homes all over the world, Nicole was still able to work with lots of our OWSD members all over the globe to create some wonderful films. So looking forward to seeing you in 10 minutes time. That will be 3:30 here in Italy, whatever time it is for you. See you later. Bye. When all of us were locked down in homes all over the world, Nicole was still able to work with lots of our OWSD members all over the globe. Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you managed to get coffee after that wonderful session on podcasting. And now we're going to go straight into a session on how to make your own films. And we have here the wonderful Nicole Leghissa from Trieste in Italy, where the OWSD Secretariat is based. Nicole is our long-term film consultant. She started off working with our partner organizations here in Trieste, the International Center for Theoretical Physics, as well as the World Academy of Sciences. She's made some films about scientists that have actually become also very well watched. And one of them in particular is called Science in Exile, about some refugee scientists, including one of our OWSD awardees who won the OWSD Elsevier Foundation Award many years ago from Yemen. And what Nicole's films do really well, and what she has managed to pass on to the people that she's been training over the last year or so, is really how to make a film about science interesting. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so in her training, she will take you through, she will teach you how you select the right protagonist, how you tell the story of the science that they're doing, what can be visually represented. And basically, sometimes, for example, what I think is also really interesting is that we've had these sessions around basic sciences and applied sciences, for example. And in some ways, basic sciences like maths and physics are not visual, right? They are about formulas, and they are about experiments sometimes. And so those kinds of questions are questions that Nicole has been considering for a very long time. How do I represent physics in an interesting way? How do I show the wonderful work that this person is doing in their head with mathematical equations? There's not an object that I can really focus on to share that with you. So these are some of the things that Nicole will be talking about today. And in particular, she's going to be explaining this wonderful project called OWSD Visions, which we began really because of COVID-19, right, Nicole? When there was, Nicole was due to carry on filming in Tanzania. She was due to go to Nepal to focus on a couple of our OWSD fellows. And of course, travel was stopped, and even within each country, it was very difficult to move around. So Nicole came up with this great project, which we at OWSD were very, very happy to support. So that's what she's going to tell you about now. Over to you, Nicole.
So hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, according to the time zones. My name is Nicole Leghissa, as Tonia already said, and I'm very proud to collaborate with the OWSD because I like other cultures, and I'm not a scientist at all. I'm a filmmaker and a storyteller. I am a documentary author. So my biggest challenge in science is, as Tonya already mentioned, how to make science interesting for a general audience, and how to engage people with the difficult things that generally scientists do, and how to make a story emotional, as already Adele mentioned. It's very important for people to be engaged, to feel something emotionally. And generally, I do this telling stories of a single protagonist, a scientist, which is quite carefully casted. And so I think every person has motivations and struggles that they go through, and conflicts. So this is what I'm trying to show and to tell through my video stories on scientists. I'm not a person of words, I'm a person of images. So I decided to make a little journey with you, presenting OWSD Visions project and my own idea of storytelling through some videos that I chose from the one we did with OWSD Visions participants and the one I did in the past. And so let's talk soon after my small auto presentation about OWSD Visions. So what it is, this project? It's an audiovisual empowerment program in filmmaking and storytelling. that through my guidance, participants are provided with online material and offline material for a few months in order to learn how to create their own videos in faraway countries where I used to travel before the pandemic. And if I could say a motto for this project, it is every scientist has a story, but not every scientist is a storyteller. So what we really wanted with OWSD was to enable filmmakers and communicators from developing countries to be able to say their own stories, audiovisual stories. I would like you to see the trailer for the project, which quite well explains the mission, the goals, and the main contents of this project, which is in the second edition in 2021 and started in 2020. So even if you can send the first video, thanks.
The people from different boxes are coming out and getting together to work against this common situation where we are all faced and we are all in danger.
I hope to be simple enough to make you understand which is the best way to get our results. I hope you enjoyed the trailer, and the images you saw edited in the trailer come from the first edition, and the majority of them come from Guatemala and from Sri Lanka. In the first edition, we had 4 participants. It was a pilot project, and it really worked well. It was a great success despite of the difficulties which are normal in a situation of a pandemic and because of the distance. So I had to guide filmmakers and researchers from Trieste while they were living and staying in their own countries. So for people to follow lessons and to follow guidance, I don't like to think about myself as a teacher, but I prefer to be a guide in the creation of the video. It was very difficult to be able to produce the videos that you will see later. I will show you 2 videos of the first edition. And so where this idea of OWSD Visions came from, actually, when the pandemic stopped me from traveling, I used to travel a lot to tell science stories, and I went to Asia, Africa, Latin America, and I couldn't travel anymore. But I really thought that women scientists create very beautiful research and have a strong impact on their societies. It could have been a really pity to stop showing their stories. So it came out quite naturally, the idea of mentoring from a distance filmmakers that can show the stories of their own countries' scientists. I talked to Tonya Blowers, OWSD program coordinator, and she really liked the project and the possibility to go on giving visibility to scientists. So we started to shape the project in I think it was more or less after the half in the June 2020, we started to think how to make this project fit into the visions of OWSD, and we decided to develop the project through the OWSD local national chapters. So the idea was to train filmmakers or communicators, professional and non-professional, which could become a point of reference and a communication instrument also for the national chapters. How does the project works? The project has online tutorials and offline tutorials, which are basically videos with me explaining how to tell a story or how to conduct an interview, how to film, and offline material are sent to the participants, and online sessions are held individually and collectively. So the first part of the project is casting the right participants, and this is done with the OWSD national chapters. The first thing we look for in a participant is motivation and availability to give his or her time to follow my guidance, and of course a minimum of technical capability to manage a camera or a mobile phone for filming. Once the participants are chosen and selected, we start together a process which lasts a few months, through which we learn together how to choose the right protagonist of the story. And this is part of pre-production, which is the first phase, how to research on the story, how to location scout, and how to write a script. So pre-production is a strong part of the project, because generally for videos you don't do scripts, but I think it's very wrong in general, or at least for me it is, because if you have very clear in your mind which kind of story you want to tell, it's easier than to produce it and create it. So in the pre-production phase, after we write the script, we try to visualize the script and create a shot list, which is a list of images that are going to be produced in the second phase, which is production. In the production phase, I follow the participants and I guide them through the filming. And this could be done with the cameras or with the mobile phones. We always prefer to have cameras and the participants with cameras, because the editing process is easier. But in any case, I think it's a good moment to tell stories with every instrument we have. And the difficulty of scientific stories is that it's very difficult sometimes to visualize. As Tonya said, if we talk about a physicist or we talk about a computational scientist, generally it's difficult to imagine what to see. And videos are done by images. So this is a big effort I try to do with the participants to the training, how to visualize a story and what should be done to make it interesting visually. So in the production phase, they film, and then there is the post-production phase, which is editing. If a participant is a professional or can edit, he or she will edit herself or himself. If not, the footage is sent to Trieste, where we edit the story, but together. So it's not my initiative, it's a shared initiative together with the filmmaker. I really had very nice experiences until now with the majority of the participants. I tried to create a bridge of communication, which is most of the time very difficult to create because of the distance. And you can imagine to share a journey of the creation of a video with someone you don't know, apart from a screen and maybe WhatsApp calls. So my first challenge and my first effort as a guide in this process is to create a stable communication bridge with the persons I'm working with. And then the other challenge is really to make the participants understand how to visualize a good science story, how to make it engaging. Work a lot on the story side. I would like to share with you a short collection of pictures that I took during the WhatsApp calls and the meetings we had in the last months. So this is the video too, Ivan, backstage. So you saw some faces, and they are really the participants to this year's course. And at the end of the short video, you saw already the participants filming with the scientists. Generally, it's all of us, we are having, I think, fun in doing this. We enjoy telling stories, and this is one of the biggest achievements for me, because people work more and with more availability and engagement if they are happy. And this is what I'm trying also to convey to the filmmakers I'm working with. If a scientist is happy about what we are doing, she will give us more time, she will give us more engagement, and she will give us more about herself, which is always very interesting, like her motivations, her failures, her expectations, hopes, and successes, but also defeats. And which stories are we telling now? Impact is really at the center of the stories. I always try to underline in the scripts that we need to show how the communities will benefit from the research that women scientists are doing. In general, women scientists around the world, in my experience, the ones I knew, are very keen to create a science which has an impact. So, for example, this year in the edition 2021, we have 7 countries participating and 7 filmmakers or communicators. They come from Bolivia, Ecuador, Benin, Senegal, Republic of Congo, Kenya, and Nepal. And the stories we are producing talk about, for example, in Bolivia and Nepal, the stories are about 2 biotechnologists who wants to extract active components from local fruits and local fruits waste in order to use the components in the pharmaceutical and the cosmetic industry, and also in the food functional food industry, in order to link the components to the industry and to help local communities to grow economically. And this is quite important for countries like Nepal and Bolivia, which are very poor economically but rich in fruits, for example. And in Benin, we are telling a story of a scientist that is working on a more efficient oven to smoke fish through also a very efficient, less polluting biomass. Benin live of smoked fish, so the majority of the population eat that. So you can imagine how important it could be really to create more efficient ovens and biomass to burn the fish, to smoke the fish. In Kenya, the story is about a physicist who is creating a more efficient refrigerator, less expensive in terms of electricity, to refrigerate and keep for a longer time camel milk. And this is to help camel milk breeders in the northern Kenya, where electricity is very, very expensive, and where the milk is the common item to market for these people. And to keep it for more than 1 or 2 days is very difficult. So to create innovative refrigerators can really have an impact on the community. And I think that in Senegal, for example, we are working on a virologist. We are telling a story of a virologist producing different kinds of vaccines to prevent viruses created in animals and then passed to humans, which is a very, I would say, update subject. Now, I would like you to see 2 examples which I particularly love of 2 videos done in the pilot edition of the project. One was made by Ximena La Infiesta in Guatemala. And with Ximena, we worked a lot in casting. She knew very well how to film and how to edit. She couldn't really understand how to tell a science story because it was not her common bread. So we worked a lot in choosing the right person. So choosing a protagonist which could be available, talkative, and open to collaborate, but also who could show us something. So with a visual kind of research. So please, Ivan, can you launch the video number 3? Thanks.
Este camino inició cuando yo tenía 12 años. Yo crecí en Mazatenango. Ahí pasé toda mi niñez. A mí me gustaba muchísimo la biología, la química, incluso la física y la matemática. Me encantaba siempre. Yo era muy estudiosa. En ese momento, cuando yo estaba en sexto primaria, yo decidí que iba a estudiar biología. Creo que yo siempre he tenido como muy claro hacia dónde voy y qué quiero ser desde muy chiquitita. Y para muchísima gente, para mis compañeros, era súper raro decir que yo iba a ser bióloga. En un pueblo, estudiar bachillerato no es común, menos para las mujeres, ¿verdad? Entonces yo era la única mujer en bachillerato. Y mientras mis compañeros todos decían que iban a ser secretarias, que iban a ser dibujantes o que iban a ser maestras, porque de qué iban a trabajar. Entonces yo les decía, pero es que yo voy a ir a la universidad y luego voy a trabajar. En ese momento, cuando entré a la universidad, yo dije, aquí es donde yo quiero estar. Desde mucho antes, a mí me interesaron los insectos, porque el mundo de los insectos es tan fascinante. Yo no creo que haya una sola persona que no se quede boquiabierta cuando yo le explico cómo hace una avispita tan pequeña para encontrar los huevecillos de la chinche para reproducirse en esos huevecillos. O cuando yo les explico pues la diversidad de las abejas, la importancia, la relación con las plantas, cómo es que yo me quedé fascinada con estas especies. Los meliponinos son un grupo que en Guatemala cuentan con 33 especies. La miel se le atribuye muchas propiedades medicinales. La crianza de esas abejas nativas es una herencia que nosotros tenemos desde el tiempo de los mayas, cerca de por lo menos 2000 años de historia. Entonces nosotros somos herederos, los guatemaltecos y los mesoamericanos, de esa cultura, de esa riqueza, de ese manejo, que aún está vivo en los pueblos originarios. Digamos, tienen un espacio especial porque han estado en los ambientes tropicales. De hecho, son de los polinizadores más importantes en los ambientes tropicales. Son muy abundantes y por lo tanto, pues merecen nuestro esfuerzo para su conservación. Cuando nosotros iniciamos, algunas personas no sabían pues la diversidad de abejas que hay en Guatemala, pues no lo sabían, ahora lo saben. No sabían la diferencia entre Apis mellifera y los meliponinos, ahora lo saben, ¿verdad? Y nosotros tratamos de publicar nuestros resultados no solo en revistas científicas, sino que también hacemos varios documentos de difusión para que en un lenguaje un poco más digerido, más fácil de leer, pueda llegar a las comunidades. Ese es nuestro papel, ¿verdad? Nuestro papel es eso, la producción de conocimiento, de ese conocimiento de nuestra diversidad, ¿verdad? Y cómo podemos hacer para su conservación. Es bien difícil ser investigador aquí en Guatemala. Creo que el principal obstáculo es el poco apoyo a la ciencia en nuestro país. Digamos, hay pocas entidades a nivel de gobierno, a nivel de universidad, que dan fondos para investigación. Esa inversión en infraestructura, en equipo, en salarios de investigadores, ¿verdad? Es muy baja. Y muchas de los laboratorios de investigación están bajo condiciones que no son adecuadas. Quiero demostrarle a los tomadores de decisiones, ¿verdad? A los políticos, que es valioso todo el trabajo que uno genera mediante investigación. Yo con eso sueño, ¿verdad? Que se le dé el papel importante a la investigación en este país y principalmente la investigación en recursos naturales, en biodiversidad, en conocer todo eso nativo que nosotros tenemos y estamos perdiendo a un ritmo acelerado.
So I hope you like the video. Maybe it seems a simple thing, but it is not. If you had the possibility to see how many locations, how many images were edited, how much work there was on the motion graphics that Ximena did, and how much work there was on the selection of the interview. Sometimes you see a video and you think it's very, very simple to create it, but it's not. We worked for a long time together. And, you know, all the stories that I try to produce and create with also with the OWSD Visions participants are based on an interview, which is like creating the structure, the content of the story. And this is the base for everything. What we do is in the script to imagine the content and the visualization. The content is given by the interview, the words of the scientist, the protagonist. The visualization is given by filming. So even in Eunice's story, there was 1 hour and a half of interview. The interview was very long. You can imagine how it takes really to go through the important extracts and to cut them and to make it work in one single video of 5 minutes. So it's complex, and I thanks a lot all the good people that are following me and giving so much time to learn how to do things. And these are resources, because in Guatemala now there is a Ximena La Fiesta who knows how to create a science story. In Nepal, there is a Sudin Basrasarye with a very difficult family name, which I'm trying to pronounce. In Ecuador, there is Fernanda and Jorge with Natura Films, who know how to tell a story of science. So our dream is really to create a big network of filmmakers and communicators that could give visibility to science stories of women scientists. And I want to share with you, maybe this is the more workshop part of my presentation, what is for me storytelling, and how I see it through my stories, showing also to you some extracts of one of the video I did for OWSD. And my approach to storytelling is really the one I'm trying to transfer to OWSD Visions participants. I think that stories, first of all, have to be engaging and dynamic. So nobody wants to see a story which is boring, and especially in science, this is a challenge. As me and Adele think, it's people don't understand what scientists do. They really think people really think that scientists live and work in laboratories or in rooms with computers. So the challenge is how to make scientists' stories interesting, dramatic somehow, and dynamic, and visuals. So I want to show you some extracts of the video, which is for me the format I'm using for OWSD Visions project. This video was shot in Tanzania with Dina Machuve, computational scientist, and it is 5 minutes long. I won't show you the whole video. I will just show you some extracts of the videos, starting from the introduction. Okay, the protagonist is the most important thing in the story, because the protagonist is the leading character. The protagonist is the one who has really to interest people. She, in this case, because we are talking about women scientists, she has to be charismatic, and she has to be open and available. So when I met Dina, I think meeting someone is always very important, and this is what I try to also to communicate to the filmmakers. You have to meet the scientist and understand if she's really willing to participate, and if she's open and a good communicator. When I met Dina in Trieste, I really liked her, and I understood, talking with her, that her science could have been visual somehow, even if she's doing a very difficult thing in front of the computer, which is computational science. So the introduction is the first part of the story. Is maybe in a story of the 4 or 5 minutes, is 30 seconds, in which you have to understand very clearly and immediately who is the protagonist and what we are talking about. And research and casting have to take into account that the protagonist, your protagonist, has to be able to explain science quite clearly. But then you will struggle in any case a lot to to make it come out from the interview. So I want to show you this introduction of 30 seconds, which is part of a 5 minutes video about the protagonist Dina Machuve. Thank you. I think it's video number 5. I didn't show number 4 because I think we are running a little bit late. So even it's number 5.
I'm an electrical engineer by profession. And my specialty currently is the information and communication sciences, but with a particular focus on the agriculture, developing solutions for agriculture sector. The work that I'm currently doing, and I've received a grant from OWSD, is to develop an automated tool for poultry diseases diagnostics. And this model that I will develop using deep learning will be deployed on smartphones.
So, as you can, I don't know if you listen to the words she's saying, but I think she's quite clear. And in what she's explaining, she's a computational scientist. Where she works, she has a project. So this was the first part of the video. Then with her, the idea which interested me is that she had something to show. So she's creating a mobile application to help poultry farmers to prevent sickness of flocks to spread very quickly into the flocks. And so it's a system of early diagnostics. And I could imagine me and Dina in going to the poultry farmers. And this, this is what makes a story interesting, that you have different locations. You go out from the laboratory, you go out from the room, and you see where the impact is going to happen. And this is something to think about in every story. So what I'm going to see, where is the science applying? Where is the impact of the story? So now we see this very curious side of the science that Dina is doing. And curiosity, innovation, and visuals are very important in choosing the science you are talking about in a story. So now we see the video number 6.
In the task of improving the poultry health, the data that we work with is fecal samples and images. And whenever I visit a poultry farmer, I am accompanied by the veterinary officer. And normally this vet officer is the one serving those poultry farmers in the area. We take a photo of the poultry, of the fecal sample. We take an image using a mobile phone. We collect that sample on a special sachet that we're going to do the testing in the lab to confirm the kind of disease or whether that particular sample is healthy. Farmers do get surprised that I'm a researcher in the first place and a woman doing science. So it takes a bit of time to make them comfortable that I'm actually the one developing the solution. Once this model is deployed on mobile phone and a poultry farmer has this mobile application, they will use this mobile app to snap a photo of the fecal sample, and then that application will tell them whether it has coccidiosis or it is healthy. It saves time because conventional methods currently is done to test whether it is Newcastle or coccidiosis is done by culturing in the lab. And culturing takes about a week to get results.
So the idea here was to explain quite clearly the challenge she's facing in doing her research, her scientific research, but also showing where her research could have an impact, and also talk a little bit about the obstacles she's facing. So generally what I do with the filmmakers, I try to fix the idea of the 4 main passages into the story. which is the introduction, the main scientific challenge, and then the obstacles and how the protagonist is facing the obstacles, and then the final solution. The final solution, which is a very bad name, sorry for that. It's like how the scientist is going to create an impact and to solve the initial problem. In this case, the problem is how to prevent flocks to die, and the solution is what she's proposing with the application. It's a very simple journey, but I think it's sometimes not easy to understand and not really maybe obvious in science stories, which tend to be more informative and not really following a narrative arc. I would like to show you a last thing, which is now, sorry, Ivan, I'm making you crazy, but I would prefer not to go on with my own stuff, but to give space to a video which I find very, very interesting and sweet also, which was done in the first edition by Amanda and Farai. It comes from Zimbabwe. And it talks about a physicist, Chipo Shoniwa. We worked a lot in finding the right protagonist to the story, because even here we wanted someone who really had an impact. Zimbabwe is a very poor country, and 90% of the population live in rural areas. So we wanted to find someone trying to find a possible scientific solution for the rural community in Zimbabwe, and they ended up with finding Chipo. Chipo is a physicist working on a biomass for more efficient cooking in alternative to wood. And there was the pandemic when Farai and Amanda filmed, so it took really a long time to get a result, to be able to go to the village, and I'm very proud of them. It's a very difficult country, but communication is very difficult, which is one of the problems I'm facing in this project. So we faced a lack of electricity many times, and we always communicated through WhatsApp. And now, please, Ivan, I think it's the number 4, the video number 4. Let me check. Yes, number 4. Chipo Shoniwa. Sorry. 4.
I am Dr. Chipo Shoniwa, Doctor of Physics. I specialize in renewable energies. At Sibindra University, I work in the engineering and physics department. I am the substantive chairperson of that department. We just have one technician, maybe you've seen him in the background, Mr. Chimiya. He assists us and also assists students in all research that we do. You know, in Zimbabwe, about 90% of people living in the rural areas are not connected to the electricity grid. And my passion as a woman, I want to work with women to solve those energy problems. In most areas, they have exhausted the woodlands. There's now shortage of food. That's the main reason why I ended up working on the stoves. The stove that we produced, the ELSA stove, can use any biomass which is cut into correct sizes and dried to correct moisture content. The main obstacles that we have in executing any research here at the university are financial challenges. We need a CNC machine which cuts very neatly, which cuts 7,000 pieces per day, which we wanted was costing $20,000 US. I can only be satisfied that my scientific work has been useful if my products get into the communities if the community starts using them, then maybe one day I could meet people saying that indoor air pollution has been reduced because of this stuff. Then I'll be satisfied that I'm doing research. And for those who are using firewood for cooking, I dream of those people having stopped cutting down trees, using only biomass residue. I am.
I hope you liked it, and I think that the video maybe could be useful to find those $20,000 to it's not much, and maybe an audiovisual product can really be helpful in supporting with funds researchers. So now I would like to show you another video and then introduce you Sudin Bazrasarie. Sudin is a filmmaker that is following with me the project this year. He finished very quickly because he's already a very expert filmmaker. We worked quite a lot on the story, on the script, but I want him to tell you about this. Maybe, yes, now. Hi, Sudin. Hello.
Hi, namaste, everyone.
We can show the video after, or you want to see the video? We show the video now.
You can show the video now.
Okay, good. So can we see the video, which is number 9? Thank you.
Namaste, I'm Pratibha Pandey. I'm a researcher and a science entrepreneur. I did my PhD in chemistry and nanotechnology from Northwestern University in the US. And currently I am focused on doing research on value addition of medicinal and aromatic plants of Nepal. After the devastating earthquake in Nepal in 2015, my husband and I decided to come back to Nepal sooner than later to start experimenting innovation and sciences in Nepal and see what can be done. Food waste is an alarming global issue where 1/3 of the food is wasted worldwide. Fruits and vegetables account for 45% of that waste. Looking at the context of Nepal, 37% of the total fruit production is shared by citrus fruits, and at least 10 to 15% of that citrus fruit is wasted. Most of the citrus fruit waste are dumped in landfill as well as in water resources, which creates huge environmental issue related to greenhouse emissions, which causes health issues for people. It doesn't only have health implications, but also has environmental, economic, and food security issue due to citrus fruit waste. Through OWSD funded Early Career Fellowship, my plan is to add value to the waste from citrus fruits, specifically orange and lime, by extracting highly valuable bioactives, which is therapeutically active chemicals, to have their uses in pharmaceutical industry, nutraceutical industry, and also cosmetic industries.
So this was just the first 2 minutes of the video. The video now is 10 minutes long. It's beautiful, 10 minutes which pass very quickly. But I thought maybe we just use a short extract for this presentation. But I leave the floor to Sudin, and I would be happy if he tells you his experience until now. And yes.
Thank you, Nicole, and namaste everyone from Nepal. So this experience has been it has been a learning experience for me, because when Nicole and Pratibha and we first spoke about this video, I had a lot of things in my mind. I wanted to, like Nicole said, like how scientists are portrayed as just to be in the lab. And so we wanted to portray to humanize a scientist. So we wanted to show family part as well. So a lot of things were happening in my head, and as always, I was very overwhelmed and very confused on how to get the story done in a very short time that we had. So, and that's where Nicole's guidance and Nicole's uh, tutorials and everything came in. The the way she taught me how to structure the script and how to get the stories divided into different parts, and then how to write scripts and then visualize what we want to have them in the script. That really helped me a lot, and I've been using this learning experience, this whatever I've learned since July, since we met in July. I have used this technique in, I think, two more documentaries that I did, and it has been a very it really surprised me how easy it is, how easy it made filming when we have everything planned in the pre-production. Right? Else, I usually have a lot of thing in my head, and then I just get my camera, and then I just go meet the person, and then I just film everything there, and then I usually did plan before, but having guidance from Nicole, I sat down. I sat down, and then I used to write scripts, and then I used to visualize everything like Nicole said, and then I used to have my short list ready that I usually don't do. But after this training, then it really became easy for me to get a lot of things that we wanted to show in Dr. Pratibha's story in the film in a very short time, and it really helped me a lot. And I'm really grateful for Nicole and OWSD Visions for this amazing opportunity, because it was a lockdown because of COVID. We were all, like I'm a filmmaker, so I'm a struggling filmmaker here in Nepal. So when Nicole and OWSD Visions happened to me, it was a learning experience, as well as it was an opportunity for me to get involved in a project. So this idea of connecting filmmakers, local filmmakers in different countries, and then mobilizing them, training them, and giving this opportunity, I really have to say this is a very smart idea, and I really loved it. And I really want to thank Nicole, OWC Vision, OWC team, Dr. Pratibha, and everyone who is involved in this for giving us local filmmakers this opportunity. And I really loved watching films from other countries as well during this conference. So thank you for having me in this conference as well. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Sudin, to you. Now, me and Sudin became friends, actually. We are exchanging images of our own cities, Italian cities, and then Nepali cities, and pieces of stories. Anyway, I swear I didn't tell him to say these beautiful things. He's very spontaneous, and it was a great meeting. And we are all looking forward to see the final video, which I already have. I have seen it already, but it will be finally finished in a very short while. And just a little note: you see at the beginning in the introduction, Pratibha, who is the biotechnologist who came back from the US, as she's saying in the introduction, is in her own apartment with the daughter and the husband. We decided this really on purpose because we wanted to show her in her scientific side, but also in her very familiar side, because she is a woman, proud to be a woman, and also we wanted to see the husband, which is quite helping her, and this is why the decision of him bringing the tea to her on the table. It seems, it's a scene, it's a small thing, but we thought about it, and so I thank you, Sudin, and for his participation. And now, very quickly, I would like, as the time is running fast, I would like to introduce you Patricia Castillo Briseno. She's a marine biologist, and she's part of the 2021 project as a protagonist of one story. She's based in Ecuador, and the group filming her is a professional couple. They have a film production company called Natura Films in Quito, Ecuador. And Patricia, I think, is very aware of the importance of visibility in science and for scientists for many different reasons. I leave her the floor to maybe explain why she wanted to be part of this project, and why she thinks that visibility through an audiovisual item can help and support the good science in countries like her own country, Ecuador. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Hi, good morning, good evening, I think, for someone abroad, and hola a todo el mundo. Yes, actually, I love this project. There is so many things I like about it, but I would like to start with the one that is like the opportunity to build that kind of connection with the people that is making communication and making the visuals, and starting to learn of their vision or how you transfer an idea from science, as you have said just a few minutes ago. Is like it is sometimes hard to explain what are we doing and why it is important to do that. It's like we are very aware of why it's important, but are very unable somehow to explain clearly for the public, and especially to explain in a more engaging way, in a more personal way. And looking at the videos, that is the other thing I found is really good for the project. Is like we are working locally, we are showing the real conditions, how we are doing science in our countries, and the struggles, and also the success when that happen, and going also in the personal way to know who are the scientists. It's not like sometimes it's like that vision very stereotypical, that is people very isolated or something like that, and it's like at the end it's not like we are just women like everyone, with families, we have a childhood and all that story that have taken us to our current moment. And the opportunity to do that, to explain also that part, has been educative, enriching, and also very, very fun. Actually, it was a fun experience to do that. Here with Fernanda Gallardo, with Jorge, it was always the analyzing, what is the best angle. I want to say a lot of things on the science, but they were saying like, so suddenly that part is really, really interesting. And that was also another point of view. Suddenly you see that the science you're doing and the people you are is very connected, and it's important to show that part to the other people. So yeah, I thank you so much, Nicole, for being part of that, and to Tonya also. I was looking at the previous videos you have generated, and actually I was also contacting, like, it's really nice, and we would like to do that from here in Ecuador. And it was great when at the end of this year they were saying like, okay, it would be nice to tell your story, and it's like, okay, it's really awesome contacting also with the people that is doing the films. And I think that is going to have an impact now, but also in the longer term, because we have started also a friendship that goes beyond that. Okay, that is work and we are doing a film, but now we are also connecting. Actually, yesterday we were filming here in Manta. I'm living in the coastal area. So yeah, thank you a lot for that experience, and OWSD, and Nicole especially for taking us to your project, taking us on board.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. Maybe I can say some final lines. It's almost finishing my time. So I really think that to give the possibility to be visible to researchers and scientists like Pat is it's something very important, because we will need more and more science in the future. We are going to be more and more people on the planet, and I think we really need science to be able to live on this planet peacefully and to share resources, and not to be overwhelmed by climate change. And Patricia also, she's working on analyzing the effects, right, of climate change on the oceans and on ocean living creatures. And she's doing it locally, but the importance of what she does is global. And I think that in general terms, if you are visible, you exist more, and you can find more funds to make your science doable, and you can inform people in the correct way, politicians, policymakers, and normal people. So ecoscience and awareness on science can grow higher and higher. So I think to give visibility to these women scientists is a very nice job. It's a very nice mission and important. And I hope that more national chapters will attend next year this project, and to create really a vast network of filmmakers around the world telling science stories from women scientists. And I thank OWSD for this, because it's always difficult to start something new, and there are always challenges in terms of content, in terms of organization, administration, and I think thanks. Because it's not, it's not granted that an organization and institution decide to start something new. And I think it's a very good point for OWSD. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was a very nice session on how filmmaking can aid in creating narratives and influencing the kind of stories that we're able to tell amongst ourselves. And it was very exciting also seeing the humanization aspect, which we've been actually focusing on, because seeing some of the scientists with their families is what we're talking about. When you humanize the entire process, you are able to make the scientist, the person who is watching the stories, realize that, yes, this is a scientist. She's doing amazing work, but she's also another human being like you are. She's going through some of the same family challenges. She's going through she has more or less the same kind of aspirations that you have. And I like that fact that it is the whole process of humanizing. And this leads me to the next session. We are going to have a conversation, and it will be a conversation with this amazing panelists, the people who we've been talking to the whole of this afternoon. So we have Dr. Tonya Blowers from OWSD. Nicole is going to be part of that session, and Miss Adelle Onyango. So what we are going to talk about right now is having an understanding on the various modes of communicating and how we're able to tell a story. When we began this afternoon's session, we started with using podcasts, so audio. How do you use audio in telling a story? And then it was followed by Nicole when she was sharing with us how you use film on how to tell a story. And the one that is interesting that we haven't talked about, and we are going to grapple. We are going to have a discussion about it today, actually in this session, is Tonya's work. And hers is on how to use autobiographies in telling a story. And interestingly enough, after she had shared with me the what she wanted to talk about, I had a discussion with Adelle. And the one thing that came to mind was we started picking out African women scientists who have autobiographies. And the first person who came to mind was Wangari Maathai. After that, we were tottering. We were trying to figure out who else do we know as women scientists who have autobiographies. So it seems like it is one mode of communication that is forgotten, but it is a very strong way of telling a story. Now, to begin this panel session, I need to know, what are the challenges you have faced in the kind of in the mode of communication that you use in telling stories. So in this case, Tonya, since we are talking about autobiography, we are beginning with autobiographies. Tell us, what do you think are the challenges most women face when it comes to using autobiographies in telling stories? And then after that, Adelle, you can share with me some of the challenges you see that exist when it comes to telling a story when you're using podcasts, and then followed by Nicole. Over to you, Tonya.
Thanks, Joy. And just if I could just say how much I enjoyed that session, Nicole. It was really fantastic to get such a clear sense of the work that you're doing and how everything's pieced together, and to get the different videos, and to have Sudin and Patricia here live talking about it. It's really wonderful. I know it's taken a lot of thought to put that together, so thank you so much. Really fantastic. I don't know if I would say it was necessarily challenging, but that writing an autobiography is not. I think it's a bit like what Nicole was saying about making films. You know, when you see a film, it looks as though it's really easy and straightforward, and that was the only way you could tell that story, right? And I think we have the same impression about autobiographies, about our lives. There is the story of our life, and that's it. We just have to tell it. But of course, you know, depending on where you start, the story will be quite different. And also depending where you end, the story will be quite different. So for example, if you decide that you want to start the story, that you must start the story at your birth date, then that already kind of prefigures the sort of autobiography you're going to write. It's more of it kind of suggests it will be chronological, that you will go into details, there will be dates and history and events, right? You might decide to start in the middle at a party, and then the audience is curious and says, or the reader is curious and says, you know, who is this person? How did they get here? So depending on where you start in your story, the sorts of questions that the reader is asking, or the viewer, are quite different. And the work that I did, it was a long time ago now, it was for my PhD at the Centre for the Study of Women and Gender in University of Warwick in the UK. But what I was very interested in there was, I was looking particularly at autobiographies, the canon of autobiographies. You know, the canon, there's a whole list of the autobiographies you should read if you want to understand autobiography. And very typically it was just a list of white male authors, you know, going back to, well, Dante in Italy was a very important one, or St. Augustine before him. And there's a sense that the way that the autobiography is structured, you know, you can look at it in all different kinds of ways. If you're a man, is there a specific expectation for you in terms of how you structure your story? If you are, you know, from the Caribbean, would you structure your story in a different way? If you're from the UK, would you assume that you should write in a certain way? If you're writing in the 1600s, is the kind of story you can write different from what you might write in the 19th century? So there's, you know, lots and lots of different things coming to play in the narrative that you tell. And so that's why I think also both what Nicole has been talking about and what Adelle have been talking about is the context is so central, right? The specific context. And what I like to think about is that we can only tell stories within our own specific conceptual frameworks from where we're coming from. We don't know how to tell stories outside our contexts, right? And that's why I think it's so important, this job that these programs that we're developing at OWSD, that it's only the people who are living in the context who know their stories the way they do, and they know the narrative, and the way they tell their story will then resonate with their audience, because the audience has an expectation of that narrative as well. So I mean, these are just the kinds of things I think is really interesting and exciting to think about when you look at film, podcast, storytelling in general.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, then Adelle.
In terms of challenges, I think two come to mind. Obviously, there's much more. Anybody who's run a small business just knows it's challenge after challenge. But the one that comes up to mind first is the challenge in creating a space that allows the storyteller who comes into that space to be as vulnerable as possible with you. And it has to be, you have to be so intentional about what that space looks like, who's allowed in that space, the prep that happens before the storyteller comes in. Do you need somebody else there to stabilize them in case it's a very sensitive story? And all of those things I'm kind of like learning as I go, because there's not too much information on that qualitative aspect of storytelling. Secondly, it's when the pandemic hit, most of my stories, because I'm based in Nairobi, so I used to record my stories in person, but that then only limits me to recording stories of people and Africans who are in Nairobi. So what happens to everybody else? And then I found a program, Zencastr, which I could use to record people. But then now the challenge that came after that is, what if somebody doesn't have access to a laptop? What happens then? And their story is still very valid. Then I found another program called Ringer that uses smartphones. So you can record someone virtually on their smartphone. But more than that, like now what I'm trying to do through the tours is to really go into the spaces. And I think Tonya has touched a bit on that, is like, when you're detached, there's a flavor that's lost in the story. But when you go into the space where the person is living this story, it does something for when they tell you that story. And so that has led us to do now more tours and to go across the country, go into the spaces and record the stories there. So yeah, it was a tech challenges, creating a space that's safe enough for any and every storyteller who comes in, and then going into those spaces where those stories are people's lived realities. Yeah.
I like the fact that we are all talking about creating us our own stories, but then it also comes with creating the safe space. And that is a reality we had not actually thought of, having qualitative information on how do you make the interviewee safe in that environment that he's going to feel courageous enough to be vulnerable to share their story. And I think this is what we were seeing. We were seeing in the previous interview with the scientist from Nepal. She was being interviewed in her home. Her toddler was in the background, and you could see the husband coming in. That level of vulnerability shows a level of realism on the whole storytelling process, and that is really important. I really like that. So what about you, Nicole? Share with me your views on some of the challenges you faced.
I think my biggest challenges have one name, which is distance. And so distance is, for me, it was personally very difficult because I like a lot my job. I like because it's a physical job. I like to be in the middle of things with my camera and to stay close to people and to stay inside things where they happen and to be like a hunter, trying to understand what to film and how, and then to establish a personal relationship of mutual trust with my protagonist. I like it very much. So this was really a personal challenge to be able to renounce to all this and try to transfer my expertise, let's call it expertise, it's passion basically, with experience to someone else. And fortunately, the generosity won somehow, and also the will to not to lose 2 years without showing things. And so this is another challenge, objective, not personal, distance in communication, which is not only with my participants, not only distance, physical distance, but also digital distance. So sometimes there is not a good connection, or sometimes really there are not the proper things to communicate in the right moment. And so to organize, to be able to create this stable communication in order to create a story is the most difficult part for me and challenging part. So I have lost a lot of time in trying to connect with the persons, with the people, and they lost it too. And finally, we found out that maybe using the mobile phone with WhatsApp is the easiest way to communicate. It's very flexible. It's not, very official and formal, but it's nice for this reason. Hey, what are you doing? Okay, can you help me on this? What did you mean? A wide shot or a close shot? What did you mean with tripod or handheld? Do I need to ask this in Spanish or in English? Okay, it's quick. You just call or send a message. And I like this very much because I feel a little bit more in the field. Yes.
And that is really interesting because it's, you see, all the things that you're talking about is there are elements of hand-holding in this entire process, which is expected. And we, in a certain way, the pandemic brought out innovative ways in which we can interact with each other. And so when you're even mentioning WhatsApp, this is quite ingenious because before it was seen as a social tool. Now it is a necessary tool for collaboration. I know that it's being used effectively for mentoring researchers. You know, you can't have access to all the researchers, but if you're in a WhatsApp group, you can support them. So this is also the same thing. And I have a question in regards to agenda setting. Now, I'll explain further. I'll explain more about what I mean by this. The bulk of the recipients of the story, the women that the recipients of the OWSD are from the global south, and there's already an existing perception about the geopolitics and the socioeconomic dynamics of the global south. So how do you see yourself decolonizing the process through the decolonizing the storytelling process through the communication tools you're using? In this case, how do you see yourself creating levels of empowerment by training women on how to use film, or training women on how to use podcasts, or even writing autobiographies, by creating their own agenda and not being reliant on the agenda that is already set by a journalist who would actually come and interview them? Because at the end of the day, what you're taking them through is what a journalist will do. It will either be a podcast, an interview, or I'll write a story on you. Tonya, would you like to begin, please? Tonya, please begin.
Yes, sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's really gets to the heart of the OWSD project, which is, this word that we use a lot in development agencies, development work, which is capacity building, which people don't necessarily really respond to as a term. But the idea is, how do countries that lack resources, how do they build themselves up so that they can, do, for example, in our case, how can they do advanced research? How can you, in a country that doesn't have laboratories, it doesn't have equipment, it doesn't have university lecturers with PhDs, how do you even begin to have a kind of minimum number of, in our case, for our organization, it's women scientists that can do that work. And capacity building is the notion that the work needs to be done within the country. And so this idea of, I guess, what you're suggesting with decolonizing is decolonizing storytelling, I think, is a really very rich concept, a very important concept that, again, it's something we just don't know that we're doing. So if you think about journalists tell stories, right? And then the stories are told in the newspapers, the stories are told on the radio, they're told on the television, they're told all over the world, and they get disseminated. But who is telling those stories that get disseminated on an international scale, and what stories are they choosing to tell? And very often what happens is it might just be that your story from your village in Africa somehow or other, attracts the attention of somebody, but then they're going to call somebody in to tell that story, so that somebody will fly in and somebody will select who they're going to talk to, and they will have access to very specific people that it's okay for this journalist to talk to, and then they will go and write the story with their own narrative structure. As I was trying to explain, in the beginning, we have our own ways of telling stories that may be very different from the way it would be told locally. So, for me, the power of this kind of capacity building work is really, there still may be a level of colonizing in the work, in that at the moment, Nicole is doing the training, right? We can't escape that.
Yeah, actually, it's what I wanted to say, because it's clear that the OWSD Visions is a result of trying to decolonize storytelling, such that the recipients are able to tell their stories. They're in charge of their narrative, which is extremely important. And that is why I felt this was a very good question to ask all of you, because there's a reason why we are, like in the case of what Adelle was sharing earlier on, telling the participants, there are open science, there are open access solutions that you could use. There are some that you don't need to pay for. There are some that are very low cost. And it starts from there, because the aspect of decolonization comes with empowerment. It comes with empowerment. And I'm doing some of this, and the projects that Nicole is doing, and the training workshops that OWSD is planning for the future, especially with the OWSD audios. This is something that will definitely help in decolonizing the storytelling process. So Adelle, what are your views on agenda setting and how podcasting can help decolonizing storytelling?
I think such an interesting question, because it's so necessary. And I think one big part, you say empowering, but it's also democratizing the access to knowledge, and democratizing the access to making that knowledge very public and very accessible. And I think for me, when I look at Kenya and really the continent, the two vulnerable communities that I think about are youth and women. And then when you have young women, they fall in both categories. So it's even worse for them. And I think everybody in the space does have a responsibility to be able to pass on that baton and pass on that information. Because sometimes, to me, it seems like it's common knowledge. But how common is common knowledge really? That's, that's a bit subjective. And so what I think is important is to have workshops. So I started doing workshops in universities to get young people actually understanding about podcasting, and then take them through the process of production, have them create their own episodes, and then have that play on their campus radio stations, so that they go through every process and start to understand exactly what it is, and they can use those platforms to be able to speak on issues that they find are important to them. Another part that we're going to go into next year is not only because democratizing like the access to information is one, but another part is like, how do you ensure that the right people are earning from the storytelling process, from the podcast production process? Because that's another problem, isn't it? Where you will have external companies or productions come into the country. They do not pass on those skills, mint the stories, and then they go. And we're left with absolutely nothing, right? So my thing is like, yes, I give you the skills, but we work on almost like a correspondence model. So we teach you how to gather the stories from your communities. This is for communities on the African continent. We give you the microphones that you will use after you pass. You go through the syllabus and you go through an evaluation. Then you get a microphone, and then after that, whatever work you do, you actually can earn a living from it. So it's two things. It's three. You are democratizing the access to knowledge. You're actually empowering people by saying, hey, you can earn from this new skill that you have. And then the third thing is that nobody is documenting certain African stories. They're literally just dying away, right? So how do we ensure that those stories in our communities are still being produced, still being, we're creating this bank in whatever languages that are comfortable to us. It does that as well. So you democratize. I think it's important to also figure out, how does someone earn from this access to knowledge that you've given them? And then also it's us ensuring that we're taking care of our local communities as well.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Adelle. Nicole, please share with me your views.
Okay. So I would add something which is important about, I think, decolonizing, and democratizing storytelling. It's about how to disseminate the stories. So it's good to create the stories, but then generally, if someone comes from the outside, he or she already knows how to disseminate the story. But what about disseminating stories which are created from the inside? So this year, what we did with OWSD Visions, we started piloting another part of the project, which is social media management. We will try, we will see what will happen, but we all thought it's good to have the stories, but then let's give support, let's give some instrument also to make people know that the story exists. So as Adelle said in her session, it's important to build a community to refer to. And this is, I think, the idea that we are going to start with those visions also. It's not my part, it will be done from someone else, but it will be a small part. We start, but I think this is very important, talking about having democratic storytelling and decolonized. Sorry for my pronunciation.
No worries. We've got the point. Thank you so much. So what is very clear, the most important part is empowerment, democratization, and also generation of revenue. So and independence, at the end of the day, is also independence and control of the narrative and curation of stories. That's what you're talking about, curation of stories. And we'll find that this that is so important, because without any of this, we'll have somebody else telling our story. So the OWSD Visions and the future OWSD audios is a step in the right direction in democratizing the whole process, but also mostly decolonizing the storytelling process. And it leads to my final question: feedback. What are your expectations on the reaction to storytelling? Whether it's an autobiography, whether it's a film, whether it's a podcast, what are your expectations? Tonya, would you like to begin?
Wow, that's an unexpected question and quite thought-provoking, in fact. And I guess it relates to something I was thinking about just now as Nicole was speaking, which is, as a program coordinator, as a project manager, actually, it is more and more the case that stories are the results that donors are looking for, right? And so that sort of answers your question in a backdoor way. But without stories, actually, it's very difficult to see what's happening. It's very difficult to know the effect of the programs or in the world. You need that narrative, and you need a very straightforward narrative. And since the work that OWSD does is really, until now, it's going to change. It's going to become much more also about trying to have an impact on institutions too. But until now, our work has really been done very much with individuals, and individuals do have stories. They do have great stories of change, of impact, of influence. And there's a kind of trajectory that funders look for as well, which is, can you demonstrate that this person has benefited from the training offered, from the fellowship that they received, and let's decide in advance what would be the indicators that this has been a successful program, right? So you kind of start putting the pillars in the life story, if you like, the pointers, the indications, and they could be, well, this person, for example, I think we would unanimously agree that if somebody has been asked to be a government advisor, a young woman scientist has been asked to be a government advisor, that's evidence of influence and of achievement and of success, right? But there might be many other different ways of measuring success along somebody's life story. And it's important that we know what we're doing and that we're very conscious about that, I think, when we tell stories as well, because people are looking at the elements that we put to show how we've been successful. So I guess to answer your story in that long roundabout way is, what are your expectations when you tell a story? I think actually those expectations can be built into the story that you then are asked to tell.
Okay.
In this program management kind of a way.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Adelle?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I agree with Tanya on that. I think for me, it's what I've seen storytelling do as I've run my podcast for the last couple of years. I think it's connections more than anything. I think we don't have enough spaces in our different industries where first we can honor and listen to each other's stories, one. And there's a magic that comes out of that results in connection. So if we are in a group and we're learning how to start building podcasts where the first step is our own story, going through that process together bridges and brings about some connection that I don't think any other format would give you. I also think we're really onto something here, especially when we look at women in STEM. I think we're onto something when it comes to representation. That is such a huge, huge aspect. And being part of the media, I think I'll take this fault with the entire media industry, at least in Kenya. We have really failed when it comes to telling those stories. And you can see it by the way we talk about women in science-related industries. It's still something that is very shocking, or it's still something where we have 1 here, 2 here, 3, but there's more. And what have we done? We've just not told these stories. But with the digital space and with podcasting, the barriers to entry to create your own platform where these stories can be told has been reduced. So I feel like now that we will give those skills of how to create a podcast, what happens is there's a lot of representation that's going to all of a sudden flood out. And that can only be impactful when you look at other women, both, I think not even on the continent. When you look at it from a global lens, it's something powerful that I think we're the cusp of doing. So I think for me, that's what I'm looking forward towards, is connections through stories, and then building that representation for spaces where we seem to think there are not enough women. They are there. We just have not been telling their stories.
Absolutely. And they're doing such amazing work. It shouldn't appear as a wow factor when we're talking about the women in science. It should be, oh, wow, I'm aware of her work. It shouldn't be a wow factor, because that's the narrative. And yes, you're right. When you look at the stories, the narrative in the media, it always comes with a wow factor. It should be, we are familiar with her work. This is what she's done. This is the kind of work, the collaborations she's doing. And, that is what we need to see. And because we see a lot of that with male scientists, but not with the women scientists. Nicole, over to you. Your feedback. Yes.
So I think for me, I would like to link to what Adele said. Adele, sorry. In Italian, it's Adele. And I think the narrative is very important, and to change the narrative, even the fact that, for example, Me, I'm a female director and author, and Adelle is a female author and podcaster. It's important because it changed completely the perspective. It's not about pushing too far the fact that women are this and that. No, it's about just telling the story from another point of view, which of course will give other, will take out other aspects of the story in a different way. And this is enough, because I think what I like of what I'm doing with OWSD is like to give visibility with another narration to minorities, which are majorities actually. So for me, it's like women need this. They are not a minority, but actually they are in terms of visibility and narration. The same for the developing countries. Let's call them with an old name, but it's I think it's the majority of the world. It's not a minority. So it's really important to be self-determined, determined in the way we tell stories. And I like a lot the fact that I'm a woman and that I can share my points with the women scientists. What do you think if we talk about your gender issues at university? Yes, okay, let's talk about it, but not too much, because I don't want to seem, you know, this kind of feminist scientist. I just want to talk about science and show it that there are problems, but even that I'm good. So, you know, this kind of discussion comes out only if there is a direct line through you and your subject. For example, it's just an example. So I hope I was clear.
No, you are. I can see what is also understandable is that also the concerns some of the subjects have, in this case, women have when they're being interviewed, on the perception that their audience will have of them. Are they coming across as ultra feminists just simply because they're looking at engendering the research process, or should I just focus on my research? And I get that concern, and it shouldn't be there in the first place. You know, it should be, I am a scientist, not even a woman scientist. I am a scientist. It just happens to be that I am a woman, but we don't live in a perfect society, and here we are. So that is why it's important to understand what the expectations are of the audience and what feedback either the interviewee or the audience is going to have of this session. I really enjoyed talking to you ladies. This was a very interesting session, understanding more about what you're doing, some of the challenges, the agenda setting, and the decolonization and decolonization of storytelling using the mediums that you're working with, whether it's autobiographies and film or podcasting. And all in all, what I can say, this has been a lovely day, and I really thank you so much for your time. Thank you, ladies, and over to you, Tonya.
Goodbye.
Wow. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Adele. That was also for me a wonderful day. Fantastic, really. Thank you so much, everybody. So I'm just here to round off the session and to let you know what's happening next week. We've finished our first week. We've had a wonderful time. Hope you've all enjoyed it. So much has happened. You can look back over all of these videos and sessions on the OWSD YouTube. Just do search for OWSD YouTube. I expect Erin's probably already putting the link in the chat for you all. And there's also the message board in the lounge. So if you're going to go wandering now into the lounge, as you do after a conference, but this time you have to do it virtually, do put any comments, feedback up there. It would be very nice for everybody to read and comment on each other's comments. Next week we have coming up, so don't forget, Monday there is the session, the poster session on the basic sciences. On the Tuesday there is a session on the applied sciences poster session. Then on Wednesday we have Angela Saini, who is an internationally best-selling author who's written a book called Inferior: How Science Got Women Wrong. And she's got some great examples of that, and it's written in a very, very popular way, and she's a great speaker, and she's going to be interviewed by the director of the Gender Summits, that's Elizabeth Politzer, who is, I would say, one of the, if not the, one of the leading experts in the world on how the difference it makes when you pay attention to gender and sex differences in your research. And that's a topic I think many people have difficulty really understanding what it means. It doesn't just mean, do you have female subjects, or do you interview women when you're looking at experiments? It's more complex than that, and the repercussions and the results of not paying attention can actually be life-changing. So I hope that you'll manage to come along to that session. There's a panel again following that, again with wonderful OWSD members who are working and thinking about these issues. That's followed by Thursday, when we will have the poster session on sex gender variables in research. And then straight after that, we have a wrap-up session of the whole conference, which will be led by our wonderful Jennifer Thompson, our president, who you will all remember gave us such a great kickoff to the conference on Monday. Seems like a lifetime away, Monday. And then on Friday, we will have a final session. Here in Italy, we're gathering with lots of with politicians and business people and people working in science institutes locally here in Trieste. And we're going to try and launch an Italian network for fundraising for OWSD. And all around the world, different national chapters are organizing events because of COVID, we aren't all able to meet in person, but within our countries, quite often we still can. So the idea is that we will still do some in-person events and report back to each other online, live, on next Friday afternoon, a week from now. So still lots of time to spend together. Looking forward to seeing you, and have a wonderful 2 days break, and see you on Monday. Bye, everyone.